Watch the ride.
Hey everybody, hope you're all doing alright out there. Baldy110 here. Yes, I have still got no hair because I just recently shaved it off for Suzuki's fault. Recent video, check it out if you want to know why. In today's video, I want to talk about some history and I want to talk about how we're now currently at a tipping point with the motorcycle industry, which is not unprecedented and it's been seen coming. And you know, it's going to be history rewriting itself, but I think it's interesting to see that this is now a thing, especially as a creator, because I can never be right. So let's talk about this from the beginning. So how did Japan kind of get to be the #1 bikes, brands in the UK? If you in the past 10, 15 years, if you said to anyone who makes the best bikes, people would say the Japanese make the best bikes, no question. And if you asked in a poll, who makes the best bikes, it would probably be 99%, 95% the Japanese make the best bikes, and I would pay extra for that. Well, let's go back a bit. So in the 50s and 60s, BSA, Norton, British bike companies were the companies that people bought bikes from. And in the next sort of 10, 20 years over that time, that's when Japan started to try and push into the UK market. They started with smaller bikes first, it went to bigger bikes later. The quality wasn't great to start with, but it's really started to improve. So then through like the 70s and 80s, they really took over, and the reason they won out over British bikes is they were more reliable, more innovative, better electronics, and cheaper, and better performance in most cases. And as we've seen over the 80s, 90s, 2000s, British brands basically don't exist, and the Japanese companies took over, and now the opinion was that Japanese was without question the best, and you wouldn't want to buy anything else other than Japanese, and it needs to be made in Japan because that means something. Now, when I started riding bikes is at a time that the Chinese market had already grown, it had been around the 80s and 90s, but to a point, but they were terrible bikes and they had a reputation for being awful, and that reputation still lives on to this day, even though it's relating more to bikes in the past. But it's true that if you pay less for something, it isn't as good as the expensive thing, although that's something that seems to be a hard concept for many people to understand. But anyway, I digress. Through the 2000s, 2010s up to now, you saw Chinese bikes get better and better, and because the competition they're up against was the Japanese bikes, which were like nearly twice the price in some cases, people bought them, and then they got better and better, and now we're in a position where no 125 is made in Japan, basically. They're all made in Thailand and India and places like that. They're not made in Japan. But the whole, Japanese is the best still lives on, and it's an argument I had for a very long time with people to do with Chinese bikes, to get them to understand, yes, the Japanese bikes are very, very good, and there is a price that goes with that. Stop saying they're made in Japan. They're not, and they haven't been for a long time. So you're going to have to then say, well, does it matter what country it's built in that makes it good or not? And of course people would say, well, yes, it would matter. A Chinese bike is built in China, so it's terrible. They don't have the same quality control. But if Honda make a bike 5 miles, literally 5 miles down the road in an air conditioning factory, then even though it's the same people, the same materials, the same, area, they believe that the quality will be completely different because there's overseers and people there to make sure everything's done to the right standard, which is an assumption and is not always true. And at the point we're at currently, Chinese bikes are doing very, very well. People are buying them more and more because they're so much cheaper. They're finding that they're good enough. And in a way, we are going through that arc of, Chinese 125s winning out. And then to meet that, the Japanese brands have had to try and not make their bikes any more expensive, which means that they no longer make the bikes in Japan. They now make them around the world in other places, as I say. So you've now got this argument of, I believe that Japanese is better because it's made in Japan, even though it's not actually made in Japan, and I'm paying twice as much for it. And this seems, at the time I thought it made sense that a cheaper Chinese bike that maybe needed a bit more work was actually an all right deal. It's not the same thing, but it's an all right deal. But of course, because I was on the internet, I was told for years and years and years about how wrong I was about this and how awful these bikes are and how they're not going to go anywhere. And that's 125s. That's the Chinese weren't competing the larger CCs, and they are starting to now. And you know, companies like CF Moto, they're coming to the UK now, and they've got larger CC bikes. We've seen other companies with larger CC bikes. The Chinese are now through the 125 market, and they're now sticking their nose into the middle market of, you know, middle CC stuff. They're not got up to thousands of stuff yet, but they're 400s, 500s. They're around there. And what is there? The Vosges 500X, which is clearly a copy of the CB500. It's the same style of bike, same sort of engine. It looks very much the same. The Vosges is cheaper, but people said, you know, I wouldn't want to buy that over the Honda. Honda's worth so much more because, you know, it's Japanese made. That's worth more. I want to pay more for that bike because I know it's going to be less hassle on that one. And that's a fair point. You know, it could be less hassle. I haven't reviewed that bike. I don't know any owners of that bike, so I don't know how well they did. So as far as the status quo currently is, Japanese bikes are the best. And with the lower CC bikes, people are kind of saying, no, it doesn't really matter if it's made in Japan or if it's made in India. It's the Japanese company that matter. It's their standards that will hold the bikes to what I want, not the fact that it's built in China or built wherever it's built. Now, why am I saying all this? What is this all history leading to? Well, now you know how things have changed along the way. Japanese are at the #1 position. I think they're starting to lose that respect thing. They're starting to lose that like cachet that makes people want to pay extra for their bikes. And the reason I say this is related to the release of the DRZ 4SM. And that's obviously why my hair is off. Seeing people's reaction to this bike, when that bike was first sold, people loved it. They sold loads of them. They were 4.5 grand. Now, inflation would make that bike 8 and a bit grand, and they're selling it for 8. So it's under what it should cost going on inflation. But now people are getting mad about the price, saying it's way too much. Suzuki is crazy asking 8 grand for this bike. That is way too much money. And so many people are bringing up the KTM 390R, which is like £5,500, £6,000, is insanely cheap. And they're saying, you know, if KTM can produce that, then why can't Suzuki make this bike cheaper? And there's a few things to say to that, such as the DRZ, the new one, is still made in Japan. The KTM is made in India. So, does it matter if it's made in India or not? Does it matter if it's made in Japan or not? Well, it used to be that people valued the fact that it was made in Japan, but now people are saying, I don't like this price, and making a comparison with, I mean, let's not forget, it's a company which was on the verge of going under for like 2 years and built way, way too many bikes and needs to sell them. I assume the 390Rs are some of the bikes that they mass produced, and that's why they're being sold off so cheaply, to get them out the door, just get them gone, because they need to amass that cash back as a company. But also the fact this bike is made in India, it should make a difference. Well, I asked in a survey, would you pay extra if a bike is Japanese made? So if you imagine you've got bike A and bike B, they're the identical bike. The only difference, and the same company built it, the only difference is one was built in Japan, one was built in India. So say the new DR was built in India. So we can make it a bit cheaper by using cheaper labour and kind of, I'm not saying exploit people, but you know, there is an amount of like, well, cheap labour is cheap for a reason. And there's a reason that these people in this country aren't getting that work now because, you know, a respectful wage is too much money. And it only came out at like 60-40 for yes, I'd pay more for Japanese. And to start with, it was way the other way. It only tipped back towards the other way towards the end of that poll. And of course it's one poll and one channel. What does it mean? It doesn't mean a lot. And as I say, I think in the past it would have been like 90-95% I would pay more for Japanese, but now it's only 60%. So I think people are starting to not care. They're also poor enough to not care. And that was kind of my Chinese argument with the Chinese bikes. At the time I wanted to get my first bike, it was 3.5, 4 grand for a Japanese bike, or it was 1,400 for a Chinese bike. Yes, it went wrong a fair bit, but it wasn't very expensive to fix. It taught me so much about bike mechanics, and you know, parts availability was okay. I think I'm going back to like 2007, 2008 when I got my first bike. So even at that time, it was still perfectly okay, and I was happy with the bike, but they weren't anywhere nearly as good as they are now. So I don't think that, you know, the Japanese are losing off and other companies are winning, because a lot of the bikes that the Japanese sell are now made in those countries as well. It's more like every brand is going to end up building their bikes wherever makes most sense for them, whether that be in Thailand or India or Europe. But I don't think it's going to be Japan much more. I mean, Suzuki and, you know, some of the big brands, they will try and continue doing it, but it is going to put a premium price on top of every bike they sell. And I just don't know if people value that premium anymore. That's my point. So will we see Japan outsourcing some of their more flagship models to other places like being assaulted by flies, India or Thailand or even some other country that they could build to produce stuff in? But the point is, the whole, like, you know, Japanese made, what that stood for and what that meant, to me seems like it's dying away, both in what they're producing versus what other people can be getting from other countries, because, you know, side by side the quality sometimes is, how can you tell the difference? But then if you say Honda quality, it's like, well, what Honda do you mean? Do you mean like one built in Japan, or do you mean one built in India? Like, is that the same quality? And then is that like well, can you really class, like, go by one bike to another bike if they're not built in the same place by the same people? Like, a lot of this doesn't matter. At the end of the day, how good is the bike? And that's kind of like what I always felt like with the Chinese bikes. I appreciate what the Japanese bikes were, but I knew that this was okay for my needs, and I knew it could improve more, and I knew that price gap, there's a lot of headroom between 1,400 and 4 grand. I was like, right, well, this bike is pretty good. There's some problems with it, but it's pretty good. But it's got all this headway it can make and still be cheaper than the competitor. So what I'm basically getting at here is I think we're at, as I say, that tipping point, kind of like the British to Japanese. I think we're now in a place where we're going from Japanese is best to it doesn't matter, it's going to be built wherever it is by whatever global economy makes the best sense to where we're going to do it. And to that end, I'd like to ask you what you think. Do you agree? I'm not saying that Japanese is not the best made and it's not worth its money. I think that Japanese made meant something, and if as long as it's held to the same way it used to mean, it still means something. They are some of the best manufacturers out there if they can put the time and the effort to build the thing. But the problem is it makes it really expensive. So then you end up selling a bike in America for what is £9,000 here, but then you have to reduce it by another £1,000, and you're also not making so much money off of it because you've had it made in Japan rather than India, but you're then being compared to a company which is going under and get away from me. Not going under anymore, being saved now, but also needing to get rid of stuff and make capital, rebuy, you know, the trust of people. And they're not made in the same place. It's just interesting how the narrative has switched now. So I was wrong in the past for liking Chinese bikes because Japanese were the best, and now I'm wrong for liking a Japanese bike because, oh, well, it can be made just as well in India, so who cares? I literally have never been able to be correct about any of this stuff according to the internet. But the history goes on, things change, things are proven right, things are proven wrong. But I'd like to know what you think. Do you value Japanese made? Would you pay more for it? And if you would, how much more would you pay for it? And do you think it really makes any difference these days? And do you think like the quality of an Indian made Japanese brand bike is just as good as if it was made in Japan? And if it isn't, as I say, how much more would you be willing to pay for that? Or do you think that it doesn't matter at this point? You're like, it's good enough, that's just polishing it. You see my point? I think the times are changing. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, help support me through Patreon and YouTube memberships, I'd really appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.